Daddy said we shouldn't spend the $100 million all at once, Mr. Hawthorne. The high-pitched voice of the child sliced through the sterile air of the Sterling Global Bank lobby, silencing Robert Hawthorne mid-tirade. Hawthorne, the CEO, had been verbally dismantling the frail-looking man, Michael, accusing him of gross incompetence for a simple filing error. Michael, sweating in his cheap, oversized suit, looked ready to crumble. But his daughter, 5-year-old Lily, standing next to him clutching a brightly colored bank receipt, had just delivered a financial impossibility. Hawthorne's face, tight with rage seconds before, became a mask of profound, dangerous confusion. The receipt in Lily's tiny hands was not a deposit slip. It was a clear statement of account balance. Robert Hawthorne moved through the 50th floor of Sterling Global, like a finely tuned engine running on pure adrenaline and historical resentment. His suit, tailored in London, didn't just fit him, it encased the expectation of quarterly profits and merciless efficiency. Every morning started at 5:00 a.m. in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, a routine dictated by maximizing output and minimizing human error. He had built Sterling Global from a niche investment firm into a monolith after his father, a simple middle manager, had been unceremoniously dismissed decades ago, a shame Robert had vowed to erase with billions. This Tuesday was no different. He had already approved 3 mergers, dismissed a slow-performing regional VP, and corrected the macroeconomic projections before 9 a.m. His authority was absolute, his word law. When he walked, the carpet seemed to absorb his presence, and whispers died instantly. But the power was brittle, a heavy shell protecting something hollow. The core of that hollowness was the absence of his wife, Clara. She had passed 3 years prior, a sudden illness that money couldn't stop, leaving a silence in the penthouse that even the city noise couldn't fill. Robert had thrown himself into work, substituting control over markets for the control he lacked over life and death. He drove his staff and himself without mercy, demanding perfection because any deviation felt like a betrayal of the stability he desperately needed. The small, framed photo of Clara on his desk was the only unauthorized object in his otherwise minimalist office, a daily reminder of his most profound failure, his inability to keep the one person he truly loved. He was in the lobby that morning only because of a personal oversight. A critical wire transfer needed manual approval, a detail he normally delegated but felt compelled to handle himself today. That proximity to the lower floors, where the everyday people banked, was unusual. It was a space he generally ignored, a place where inefficiency bred. When he saw the junior bank clerk, Michael, fumbling with paperwork and holding up the line, the accumulated pressure of his routine, the unresolved grief and the need for absolute order exploded. He didn't just reprimand Michael, he sought to incinerate him. And then the clerk's daughter, Lily, uttered the impossible figure, the $100 million balance, attached to the receipt Michael was trying to hide. Robert Hawthorne felt a cold thread of genuine panic weave through his carefully constructed reality. Something was deeply, frighteningly wrong, and for the first time in years, it wasn't about the market. Michael Jennings was the ghost in the machine of Sterling Global. He wasn't a banker, he was the night custodian, the man who emptied the trash, sanitized the keypads, and made sure the executive floor looked pristine for Robert Hawthorne's grand entrance each dawn. He worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., pulling double shifts when necessary, navigating the echoing silence of the financial giant while the city slept. His hands were permanently stained with industrial cleaner, his back a constant map of dull aches. Michael wore his fatigue like a second, heavier skin. His cheap suit, purchased specifically for the rare, nerve-wracking trip to the bank during the day, was a futile attempt to look like he belonged. He didn't. His focus was always the same: keep his head down, work the hours, and bring home enough to cover the rent and the soaring costs of Lily's special tutoring. Lily, his 5-year-old daughter, was his sun and his fragile anchor. Michael was a single father, her mother having left shortly after Lily's birth. Every sacrifice, every aching muscle was for her future. She was a child of fierce curiosity, bright and perceptive, and Michael was terrified that his constant financial limitation would dim that light. Today, he had braved the bank lobby during business hours only because of Lily. She was home from daycare with a fever, and he couldn't leave her alone. He needed to deposit his meager paycheck and rush back. The embarrassment of Hawthorne's public humiliation was a bitter, familiar taste, but what truly terrified him was the small, innocuous piece of paper Lily held. It wasn't his receipt. 2 nights ago, while sanitizing the plush, oversized office of Mr. Thomas Sterling, Robert Hawthorne's co-founder, a man famous for his eccentricity and equally famous for being out of the country for months, Michael had found an envelope taped inside the back of a desk drawer, clearly meant to be hidden. Inside was a crisp, official bank receipt listing a balance of exactly $107, dated just 1 week prior. Michael, panicked by the sheer illegality of holding it and unable to contact Mr. Sterling, had shoved it into his jacket pocket. He had intended to slip it back, but the opportunity hadn't arisen. Lily, rummaging through his jacket looking for loose change this morning, had found the colorful paper and, mistaking it for a drawing, had insisted on carrying it. Michael now knew the truth of the receipt, but he hadn't yet grasped the true danger it represented, or why it was hidden. If you are following this story, tell me where in the world you are watching from. Robert Hawthorne stood frozen, the noise of the busy lobby dissolving into a distant hum. His brain, calibrated to analyze multi-billion-dollar trades, was locked onto the ridiculous, impossible number, spoken by a 5-year-old girl, and confirmed by the slip of paper. $100 million in a private account, linked to a simple bank receipt carried by the daughter of the night custodian. He watched Michael, the humiliated man he had just scorned, snatch the receipt from Lily and hastily try to tuck it away. Michael's shame was raw, but beneath it, Robert saw a flicker of genuine terror, an emotion Robert was expert at recognizing. Hawthorne did not dismiss the custodian. He didn't fire him, though the impulse to erase the public embarrassment was strong. Instead, he simply stated, his voice dangerously level, "Mr. Jennings, my office. Now." It wasn't a question. It was a command that promised professional execution. Michael, his chest tight, numbly followed the CEO toward the private elevator. Lily, confused but quiet, clung to his trousers. As they ascended, the gap in their realities was never clearer. Robert Hawthorne stared at the reflective steel walls, mentally calculating how a 9-figure sum could be linked to an invisible employee. It felt like a bug in his perfect system, an anomaly that needed immediate, aggressive quarantine. Michael, meanwhile, was praying the elevator ride would last forever. He assumed the receipt must belong to Thomas Sterling, the co-founder, and that Hawthorne had somehow recognized the account or the bank's internal code. Michael braced for the accusation of theft, the loss of his job, and the complete impossibility of paying his overdue bills. His fear was simple, tangible, and focused entirely on protecting Lily from the fallout. He didn't care about the rich man's money. He cared only about his daughter's security. When they reached the top floor, Robert escorted them silently into his vast office. He didn't offer a seat. He simply pointed to the receipt Michael now held, clutched tight. "Where did you get that, Jennings?" he demanded, his gaze boring into the custodian. The coldness in Robert's eyes was chilling, but Michael noticed something else, a frantic edge hidden behind the composure. Robert wasn't just angry. He was seeking an answer he desperately needed to know, perhaps even an answer he feared. The question hung in the air, the first fragile connection between their separate worlds of power and poverty, about to yank both men off their foundations. Michael, still reeling from the encounter, hesitated. He was about to tell the truth, that he found the receipt in Thomas Sterling's office, when Lily interrupted, pointing a small finger past Robert Hawthorne's shoulder, toward the cityscape, visible through the massive glass wall. "Why is that building dark, Daddy? The pretty one?" Robert instinctively turned, irritated by the distraction, but Michael's eyes followed Lily's gaze, settling on a prominent modernist skyscraper a few blocks away. That building, owned by a rival firm, Quantum Ventures, was always a beacon of light, running 24/7 financial operations. But today, the top 10 floors were inexplicably dark, save for a single intermittent flashing light in one corner office. Robert dismissed it instantly. "Maintenance issue. Focus, Jennings. The receipt." But Michael's anxiety spiked for a different reason. He cleaned Thomas Sterling's office every night, and every single night for the past 3 weeks, Michael had noticed a pattern. Sterling's secondary computer monitor, always left on standby, displayed a continuous, highly unusual news feed. It wasn't stock tickers or typical financial news. It was reporting exclusively on the slow, almost invisible financial difficulties of Quantum Ventures. Thomas Sterling, the co-founder who had been missing for 6 weeks, had been obsessed with that rival firm. Michael had always filed this observation away as eccentricity. Now, combined with the $100 million hidden receipt, the dark building and the single flashing light, the pieces refused to stay separate. Michael looked back at Robert Hawthorne. He saw the impatience and the desperate need for control, but also a tension in Robert's jaw that wasn't just about an employee finding a stray paper. Robert seemed genuinely surprised by the location of the dark building. Michael, the invisible custodian who spent his nights observing the residual habits of the powerful, suddenly understood. The receipt wasn't just money. It was linked to whatever secret Thomas Sterling was hiding concerning Quantum Ventures. If Robert Hawthorne was truly a partner in Sterling Global, why was he reacting like the 100 million was a bomb he hadn't known was ticking? Michael felt a chilling wave of protective instinct. He couldn't just hand over the receipt and risk being implicated in whatever dark scheme was unfolding. He decided to test the ground. "I found it, sir," Michael said, his voice surprisingly steady. "But I think you should look closer at the date and the name on the account. It's not a Sterling Global account." He omitted where he found it. Buying time. Robert Hawthorne frowned, reaching for the receipt, his eyes narrowing. The custodian had just shown a dangerous, unexpected flash of intelligence. Robert snatched the receipt, his focus absolute. The name on the account wasn't Thomas Sterling's, nor was it a Sterling Global entity. It belonged to an obscure shell corporation managed by a small independent firm. The date confirmed the massive deposit had been made recently. Robert's eyes flickered with a raw comprehension. Michael used the precious seconds of Robert's distraction to make his move. He knew he couldn't hold the receipt back forever, but he needed a guarantee of safety for Lily. Instead of confessing to finding the receipt in Sterling's office, Michael made a direct accusation based on his nocturnal observations. "Mr. Hawthorne, I've cleaned this building for 5 years. Mr. Sterling hasn't been here, but his computer has been running every night, tracking Quantum Ventures. He was planning something," Michael stated, his voice tight with the realization of the massive gamble he was taking. Lily, sensing the shift in mood, began to whimper softly. "This receipt, this money, it's not random. I saw the newsfeed. That money is being used to cripple Quantum, and I think Mr. Sterling staged his own disappearance." A heavy, absolute silence fell over the spacious office. Robert Hawthorne's face was unreadable. Michael had just voiced an accusation of corporate espionage, possibly treasonous market manipulation, against Robert's own co-founder. The risk Michael had taken was immense. He had traded the danger of being fired for the danger of being silenced. Robert slowly crumpled the receipt in his hand, his eyes never leaving Michael. "You are suggesting my partner is a criminal, Jennings, based on a news feed you saw while emptying a waste bin?" His tone was cold, dismissive. Yet the grip on the paper was white-knuckled. "I'm suggesting he had $100 million hidden outside the company books," Michael countered, his fear fueling his nerve. "And if you didn't know about it, then he was hiding it from you, too." The accusation landed not on Michael's competence, but on Robert's control. The one thing Robert Hawthorne could not tolerate was operating in the dark within his own domain. He looked at the receipt, then at Michael, the exhausted custodian, and finally at Lily, the innocent bystander. He realized the terrifying truth. Michael was the only unbiased witness, the person with zero stake in the corporate power game who had accidentally seen the full picture. The story had just violently veered away from a simple clerical error and into a deep, volatile conspiracy. Robert needed to know everything, and he needed Michael alive to tell him. Robert stopped thinking about firing Michael and started calculating exposure. Michael Jennings wasn't a liability. He was an unauthorized, highly informed witness. If Thomas Sterling had indeed orchestrated a massive off-the-books maneuver using shell corporations, the $100 million being only the visible tip, It meant Sterling Global itself was compromised. Robert's empire, his meticulously built legacy, was sitting on a foundation of sand, potentially facing regulatory disaster. He dropped the receipt onto his desk, suddenly urgent. "Jennings, I need everything. Detail. Where exactly did you find this? When? Have you seen anything else? Any visitors to Sterling's office late at night?" Michael, sensing the shift from aggression to necessity, relaxed marginally, still holding Lily close. He confessed to finding the receipt taped under the drawer and the repeated observation of the Quantum Ventures newsfeed. He explained the peculiar flashing light in the dark building, a detail that Robert immediately recognized as a potential coded signal. Robert picked up the phone, bypassing his secretary and dialing a private internal line reserved for his head of security, a former federal agent named Agent Davis. "Davis, secure the office of Thomas Sterling. Immediately. I want a full forensic sweep. Nothing moves until I say so. And Davis, I need a detailed background report on Quantum Ventures. Find every connection they have, direct or indirect, to any offshore account in the last 6 months. Robert then turned back to Michael, his eyes intensely focused. Thomas Sterling disappeared 6 weeks ago. Officially, he's on sabbatical. Unofficially, he was losing control, making erratic decisions. He was my partner, but the firm is my father's legacy, not his. Robert's guilt about his father's old shame fueled a sudden, fierce loyalty to the institution. If he is manipulating the market using company prestige and private funds, the SEC will shut us down. Robert looked at Michael, recognizing the depth of the custodian's vulnerability. You are protected now. Jennings, you and your daughter. If anyone asks, you never spoke to me, you never saw this receipt. I am going to find out what Sterling is doing, and you are my only internal lead. The urgency was real, and Robert realized he had to rely on the man he had screamed at minutes ago. The man who knew the hidden corners of the building better than he did. The search for Thomas Sterling and the missing millions had begun, pivoting entirely on the observations of the invisible night custodian. Agent Davis worked fast. The forensic sweep of Thomas Sterling's office confirmed Michael's initial find. A sophisticated hidden network hub dedicated entirely to monitoring Quantum Ventures and communicating with an untraceable IP address. The $100 million was part of a larger, coordinated short-selling scheme designed to bankrupt Quantum and then allow Sterling to acquire its assets cheaply through the Shell Corporation. It was a hostile takeover, masked as a market crash, built on illegal insider trading. The confrontation happened not in Sterling Global but 3 days later in a secluded, dusty safe house near the New Jersey shore, identified through the coordinates linked to the flickering light Michael had spotted. Robert Hawthorne and Agent Davis, with Michael and Lily waiting safely in the car, cornered Thomas Sterling. Thomas, unshaven and panicked, was staring at a bank of monitors detailing Quantum's spiraling stock price. When Robert entered, Thomas's defensive mask crumbled instantly. "Robert, you shouldn't be here. It's almost done. I needed this. They ruined me years ago," Thomas shouted, his paranoia boiling over. "You didn't need to destroy the firm, Thomas," Robert said, his voice laced with the bitterness of betrayal. $100 million in private funds, insider trading. You used Sterling Global's reputation as cover." Thomas laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Reputation? You mean your reputation, Robert? You made everything about your perfect image, your control. I brought in the seed money. I just wanted my due, and Quantum was the key. They took my first investment firm. This was revenge. Revenge that risked everything I built, everything my father died hoping I would achieve honestly." Robert retaliated, the old grief surfacing. "You hid a receipt and you thought no one would notice? You underestimated the people who actually run this building, Thomas." Thomas scoffed, looking past Robert. "Who? That pathetic janitor you screamed at? Michael? He's nothing. He sweeps the floor. He couldn't possibly know. He saw the details, Thomas." Robert cut in sharply. "He saw the obsession on your screen. He saw the pattern no one else saw because everyone else was too busy looking at the balance sheet, not the cleaning log. He had the courage to tell me the truth, even after I humiliated him." The mention of Michael's name and simple act of observation broke Thomas. His carefully constructed web of deceit fell away, exposed by a custodian and a 5-year-old child. The realization that his massive, complex scheme was undone by a piece of paper found by the lowest-ranking employee was the ultimate humiliation. Thomas lowered his head, the monitors flashing behind him. The fight was over. The lie had shattered. The fallout was seismic. Thomas Sterling was arrested by Agent Davis's former colleagues. The ensuing investigation revealed the full scope of his market manipulation. Sterling Global did not collapse, but it was profoundly shaken. Robert Hawthorne was forced to go public, announcing Thomas Sterling's illegal activities and affirming that the firm had cooperated fully with regulators. The public relations cost was staggering. Years of reputation building were damaged by the actions of one greedy co-founder. Robert lost more than just reputation. He lost a major part of the firm's equity, which was used to stabilize the market and mitigate the damage to quantum ventures. He spent weeks in endless regulatory meetings, the polished facade of his absolute control dissolving under the pressure. The silence of his penthouse became louder than ever, the isolation a direct result of his previous insistence on operating without trust. The price of the truth was the acknowledgement that his power had been entirely contingent on ignoring the inconvenient details and the people who noticed them. Michael Jennings, however, faced his own unique consequences. He did not lose his job. In fact, he was given paid leave during the investigation, but the fear remained. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, acutely aware that exposing a billionaire meant making powerful, dangerous enemies. The neighborhood gossiped about his sudden proximity to the CEO and the police. Lily, though safe, asked constantly about the angry man and why Daddy had to talk to the police. Michael felt the weight of the moral confrontation. He had done the right thing, but it had introduced a level of chaos into his simple life that he never wanted. Robert called Michael into the office 2 weeks later, no longer the CEO yelling at a custodian, but a man humbled by vulnerability. "We avoided catastrophe, Jennings," Robert said simply, "but the firm is forever changed. I had to pay a price, we all did." The loss of the old perfect structure was painful, forcing Robert to look inward at the emotional rot he had ignored for years. He had nearly lost everything, not because of the markets, but because of his own blindness and arrogance. The only thing that remained intact was the simple truth revealed by the man he considered invisible. 6 months later, the dust had settled, leaving a new surprising clarity in the halls of Sterling Global. Robert Hawthorne still held the title of CEO, but the iron rigidity was gone, replaced by a quiet professionalism and a focus on transparency. He started delegating authority not based on seniority, but on observed integrity. The photo of his wife, Clara, was no longer just a reminder of grief, but a prompt to live authentically, outside the constraints of relentless control. Michael Jennings stood in the same lobby, but he wasn't wearing a custodian's uniform or a borrowed suit. He was wearing the crisp, new uniform of a security operations manager. Robert had promoted him, giving him a specialized, well-compensated role focused on internal oversight and systems monitoring, a job perfectly suited to a man who notices the details everyone else ignores. The salary was enough to pay for Lily's tutoring, the new apartment, and the complete removal of the constant grinding financial dread. Robert encountered Michael near the elevator bank one morning. He didn't bark an order or demand a report. He simply stopped. "How is Lily's new school?" "Excellent, Mr. Hawthorne. She loves the science classes," Michael replied, the old fear replaced by genuine respect. "Thank you." "For everything." "No, Michael." "Thank you," Robert said, an honesty in his voice that had been absent for decades. "You reminded me that the people who see the most are often the ones we choose not to look at. Sterling Global is stronger now because it's finally built on honesty, not just profit." The improbable bond between the billionaire CEO and the former custodian was simple, a shared allegiance to the truth, revealed by the innocence of a child holding a bank receipt. Michael found dignity and security, no longer invisible, recognized for his courage and keen eye. Robert found redemption, rebuilding his legacy on integrity, finding a quiet hope in the chaos. He was still the man in power, but now he was looking down and seeing the humanity on the ground floor. Michael, walking out with Lily that afternoon, held his daughter's hand tight. The weight of the world was still there, but now he had the resources and the recognition to face it head-on. They were safe. If you enjoyed this story of hidden courage and unexpected transformation, please remember to leave a comment below telling us what you thought about Michael's ultimate reward, and subscribe for more deep, emotional tales like this one.